The idea is that we have a joint discussion as the final phase of this colloquium on determinism and freedom, which has come out actually, as far as I can see, as a colloquium on determinism and indeterminism. We have seen roughly two big camps on this issue. Namely, some of you have defended the deterministic point of view in a more or less sharp way. Some others have rather tended to defend an indeterministic point of view. Perhaps just to warm up the debate, which I would like that takes place among you, just to warm up with a few words. I think that perhaps before discussing what the arguments are or could be in favor of either one of these positions, we might try to be a bit more precise about the concept of determinism itself, which has played a central role in all your lectures. Perhaps we might ask whether determinism or the property of being deterministic is a property that should be applied to not to the world itself, not to reality, but rather to theories, the theories we develop in historical time to deal with reality. So that perhaps the debate would not, I mean, that's just a possibility I throw upon this occasion. The debate would be no much between the claim that the universe is deterministic by itself, which probably is a claim that's meaningless, I would rather tend to believe, but rather that we invent or we develop some theories, some conceptual frameworks, which in previous times tended to be deterministic in character, in classical physics, in biology and so on, but in recent times, especially since the 1920s, have become more and more of an indeterministic nature. Now perhaps we should ask ourselves, and that's a question I would like to pose you just to start with, whether this is just a fashionable trend in recent science, a trend that perhaps is even a mistake. It's bad methodology to develop indeterministic theories. It's just a provisional state of science. Or rather, perhaps you believe that's the final stage, that indeterminism is a definite acquisition of the human mind, and there is nothing to change. Well, I would just put this question, if you have, of course, some other disagreements among you, I would also like to cheer you to express them.
Well, I am feeling a little uneasy, I would say, by this semantic direction of discussion. First of all, I would like to say that as a physicist, theories for me are about nature. Of course, one can take different point of views. I would also say that the question about the existence of the necessity of use of probabilistic concepts is today so deeply involved in physics that the idea to say that it may be a methodological mistake, I think is rather difficult to conceive even, I would say. Therefore, that's quantum mechanics, after all, always dealing with mass description in some way or another. Now, the number of situations which can be dealt with in classical mechanics on a statistical basis, but not on an individual basis, like the one which I mentioned, there are many now. For example, if you follow nature, you would see, I think, or science, I don't remember now, you would see the recent work on the Kirkwood gap of asteroids, which is again a situation of the same type. Therefore, I would like more to say that what at least I am, as a physicist, I'm interested is to develop mathematical schemes which are applicable to situations in which we can make experiments or look on the structure of comets or asteroid belts and so on. And we see today that this requires an extension of the usual framework, an extension which goes in the direction of mass phenomena and which goes in the direction of irreversibility, because in these cases, for example, you have stochastic equations with broken time symmetry, which are very successful. So I think essentially one has to not to forget that we are not living in the universe which we have chosen. We are living in a universe in which we try to find our way, and not in a universe which we would like to describe in some way which may be more beautiful, less beautiful, semantically more acceptable, or less.
Mr. Chairman, I would just first add a precision to what you said. Namely, you said determinism has to be defined for theories. It seems to me, for me, I would be more precise. I would say one can define determinism, at least in a scientific sense, only for models and not for theories. For instance, in biology, you could ask whether the Darwinian theory of evolution is deterministic or not. I believe that this is a question which practically has no meaning, and it would be very difficult to give a meaning to this question. And as a result, I believe that to be on a fairly strict ground, one has to reduce oneself to discussing deterministic properties of models. And as you perhaps allow me to repeat what I said in my talk, determinism is useful in science in as much one can embed the temporal evolution of the system we are looking for into a more general set of virtual evolutions, and to give criteria out of which we can extract the really existing or the really possible evolutions from this set of virtual evolutions. Now, the main point, of course, is that this set of virtual evolutions has to be generated by a canonical procedure of constructive nature. Otherwise, we do not really know of what we are speaking about. This is what happens in biology, for instance, when people speak about the possibility of virtual evolution of a species, out of which natural selection extracts the one which really happens. Because we do not know the precise status of this set of virtual evolution, the Darwinian theory is extremely suspect from an epistemological point of view. So I would myself prefer to restrict the discussion on this very specific territory.
What do you mean? The territory of models?
The territory of models, and more precisely mathematical models, of course.
I want to say that what you call mathematical models, that is exactly that thing what we call a physical theory.
For me, a theory is a generator of models. There is a distinction, a very simple distinction.
Perhaps,
for instance, the theory of differential systems on manifolds, is that your physical theory for you? No, of course it's a mathematical theory, but nevertheless all discussion, like the example given by Professor Prigogine, most of them were extracted from this theory. Yeah, yes, they were models of this theory.
But perhaps we can come together if we take not the same word, perhaps theory or model. I mean, when I say theory, a mathematical model with a physical interpretation. With a
physical interpretation, of course, the situation becomes amenable, I would say, to pragmatic, to the pragmatic point of view, and I agree with this.
And then I can say that some of these models have a deterministic dynamics.
Yeah.
And other one have no deterministic dynamics. They are described by probability, that is by measures over the trajectories, by trajectory measures. And perhaps you have remarked that we are very similar, because I have also said in my talk that in the modern physics it is not possible to describe all things by deterministic models. We have to change, in the case of instability, that's my intention, to change the model from a deterministic one to a probabilistic one. And I mean that you agree that this would be the better theory in the future. And it is, by my meaning, not necessary to go in the discussion to quantum mechanics. Yesterday I had here in the discussion the impression that this was not a discussion of determinism or indeterminism, it was a discussion over the problems of quantum theory. But the world we are interested is a macroscopic world. We are macroscopic bodies in the world, and so on. And therefore, I would propose to constrain the discussion to the macroscopic bodies. And we have the opinion that also in this region the models have to be in the future probabilistic models.
Yeah.
I would like to make a suggestion. We can stay here for 24 hours and we shall not come to an agreement. There is just no point. I mean, positions have been expressed, and it should be very interesting for the people who are here that even in these questions, which are rather abstract, rather reasoned also in some way, there is just no unanimity in the scientific world. And I don't think that you will force us to come out with a consensus or majority vote. Therefore, I really think it would be much more profitable for the audience to ask us questions than to continue to quarrel about things on which we shall not change our opinion. We have the opportunity to express our opinion. You are essentially, and the young people especially, will be the ones which will continue our work, and your choice will be the one which will determine which theory will grow and which theory will decay. And therefore, I really hope that the discussion should be a discussion not between us, but with the audience.
Well, I don't know whether the rest of the persons who are present here agree with Professor Prigogine, so perhaps we should also ask the other colleagues first. Perhaps, yeah.
Well, I come from another field, and I said this morning that I was rather unhappy with the distinction between determinism and indeterminism in biology, as applied in biology. Also, I tried to explore in the field of evolution about the ways in which what I believe is considered as indetermination can creep into nature. And I feel no reason for a clear distinction between determinism and indeterminism. Why not to focus on some problem, some classical problem in the field of biology, like the origin of life, for instance, that I wonder why it has not been raised here before. Now, I am very glad that people here in the panel, mostly physicists, chemists too, but a majority of physicists in the case of coming to a board, no? No, in the sense that until now, the problem of the origin of life has been discussed very much by people coming from chemistry, and always they discuss it the way some molecules can be synthesized and they came together as co-surveys and so on. I must confess that always, to me, this has been remaking or rebaking of the old idea of the Greek philosophers that nature produced a large number of separate organs and came together and made either monsters that disappeared through natural selection or complete organisms that multiplied. I have always had the feeling that in life, energy could be perhaps more important than such materials, in the sense to associate life to gradients of oxidation, reduction, of all sorts of chemical and physical properties in some areas. Now I ask if, from the point of view of physics, the passage of a number of small pieces that came together and act as the seeds of a new organization on one side, on the other side, the existence of gradients in chemical and physical properties to which a number of physical-chemical processes adapt, if both kinds of process can be put together or kept separately, and what is more important, and if in considering such processes it is necessary to introduce some form of bifurcation, instability, and so on and so forth. I think this is a question that may interest at least some of my former students. Will be much pleased that this is discussed with people that can say something useful on the subject.
It's not really another proposal, but you mentioned as an opening of the discussion that the meeting has shifted from the proposed subject of determinism and freedom to determinism and undeterminism. I personally do not see any contradiction between determinism and freedom. Perhaps I'm blind to philosophical problems, but I do not see where is the difficulty. But I think that we have reached a point where we should give up our own personal talks and start thinking openly about the problem of freedom.
Human freedom. Freedom of action.
Human freedom.
Human freedom, yes.
Yes, perhaps.
I think there's something about it in the United States Declaration of Independence. To say that men are born free.
I infer from this that that's your philosophical position on freedom. Or
No, I gave an answer which I would still maintain in my talk, which I thought that, or earlier on, that we all think we are free. We all believe we are free, but there may be other people who observe us intimately may consider that we are in fact the result of our genetical influences and act almost like automata, although we ourselves certainly wouldn't think so.
Professor Ludwig.
Yes, it's my opinion that the concept of freedom, of human freedom, that I am free to decide something and so on, is not a physical concept and not a scientific concept. Therefore, if we take the question up, what is the relation between determinism and freedom? It is a very difficult relation between scientific, or more precisely physical concept with a non-physical concept. That's a very difficult. But would you say that it is possible that human freedom, logically possible, that human freedom can contradict to physical determinism? Is it possible or not?
I just said the contrary. But you see, I accept easily the idea that we do not have the proper knowledge of the proper competence to talk about human freedom. But on the other hand, should we speak about it in the name of science? After all, there are other aspects.
Professor Prigogine.
I find this a slightly traditional approach to this problem, and I feel that the interest of our time is to take a less traditional approach, because I would say in the classical view, you had precisely this question of Einstein saying time is an illusion. You see, life is an illusion. Life is in some sense out of the basic laws of nature. What we see today is that this is probably, so far as we can judge, not true even in physics. And therefore, the question becomes quite different. You see, if you believe in the strict formalism like it exists in simple deterministic systems, typical deterministic systems, then indeed freedom can only be an illusion, not knowing. Once you begin to see that the brain is acting as a highly unstable, chaotic system, this question looks very differently. And I think the main point is that some of the contradictions which existed in the traditional point of view, where you have to choose between an anti-scientific ideology or between an alienation saying, yes, we are automata, but we don't know, that we are automata. You see, accepting this alienating point of view, this is precisely this dichotomy which we are no more facing today.
Yeah.
I will act as devil's advocate in a certain way. Let me ask a question. Maybe human freedom delusion has been selected by natural selection because it was necessary, or it was convenient, or it helped to develop human nature?
But I think the opposite is true. I mean, we see more and more. You see, I'm very interested in insect societies. I'm very interested in insect societies because they are the most successful ecological societies I know. As everybody knows, perhaps, they're about the biomass of ants is about 10 times the biomass of human beings. And people today make many efforts to understand what makes the success of ants. The classical view is, of course, an ant being a small deterministic automata and doing this and that. And we see today that it's not true at all. I would say probabilistic behavior is really the expression of the imagination of an ant society. When you give to an ant society some food, if it would behave like a deterministic system, all the ants will jump to this food, eat it, and come back. But then they would not notice that there may be some better food further away. And the ant society behave in a very clever way. They send some ants to eat the food, but they have also many ants exploring the neighborhood, as you know better than I. And it is this exploration activity of the ant society which makes the great ecological success of ant societies. Therefore, the probabilistic behavior is in fact one of the, I would say, advantages of biological evolution. And I think this is something which is very difficult to take as an illusion or I don't know what. It is just a fact which we observe. And I think this biological evolution leading to this highly complex behavior of the brain, what has been selected is not deterministic behavior, but what has been selected is more and more creative behavior, more and more novelty creation. I think that is really what has been selected. And for this you needed a kind of substratum which was already very far from the classical deterministic substratum envisaged by classical physics.
Margalef.
Well, I admire very much ants that I prefer to be a human. My point is that an organism is more important one large organism than many small individuals. Like a computer, a large computer is more powerful than a number of small units.
Maybe not.
can create a larger number of combinations, probably. Well, anyway, ants, being a species divided in so small animals, can, as you say, provide for exploration, for coordinate behavior, and so on and so forth. But man, having an equivalent biomass compacted, say, in one unit, has to have a very developed, explorative, and manipulative.
Exactly. Very much exploring,
Okay.
even more so. Therefore, I agree completely.
And the feeling of individual freedom is substantial to those.
Not all, by the
behavior.
feeling, I mean the fact.
A fact. Well,
By the feeling. The idea of the feeling is precisely the antiquated survival of antiquated views. There's no reason to speak about feeling. It is just the fact. The works of Dali are as real as anything else. I mean, it is just there on the wall.
I agree, but in fact, I say the feeling because I tended to believe that people working in physics prefer it to hear about
You have not the
feeling
right.
than about the facts.
Then you have not the right
No?
reading.
Okay.
You have not the right reading. That's all what I can say.
Professor Thom.
Well, it is just to say that one should refuse the simple dichotomy between deterministic, which means naive and simple and so on, and probabilistic. In fact, there are a lot of situations in between, so to speak, in the sense that starting from a fairly simple mechanism, like let's say the behaviorist scheme, stimulus response, to much more complicated situations, and describing this much more complicated situation as being probabilistic is already something which is not legitimate, because they may be in fact the result of fairly complex behaviors and extremely complicated inherited situations. So it seems to me one has to take into account this fairly complicated fact that determinism might be itself extremely complicated, and there is a kind of continuous spectrum between a simple system which you can describe and in which you can predict, to a situation which is almost completely undescribable. But this is now about free will. I have myself a kind of simple model. I believe that the feeling of free will that we have is due to the fact that we have a mechanism which in our brain is a sort of random generators. There are many situations in which you have to take a decision. For instance, suppose you cross a fairly large street, and the light for pedestrian gets to red when you are about 2/3 of the crossing. Then in that case, you have the choice between two strategies: either walk back or hurry to get on the other side. Now, the main point is that you cannot wait very long to take a decision. You have to take one, apparently, in principle, the best, and the better one, and then follow this decision. Staying indefinitely on this threshold would be extremely dangerous. So I believe that essentially for biological reasons, we have in our brain mechanisms which allow us, so to speak, to break symmetries, precisely, and by using, I would say, relevant criteria in some cases, eventually irrelevant criteria, and finally get a decision when it is needed. So this type of mechanism, I believe, is one of the constituents of our feeling of freedom. Because we think that we can, so to speak, more or less freely choose the corresponding strategy.
I think that is what most of us would imagine, that freedom is just knowing choices and making them, yes? essentially.
Yeah.
So whether that is good, what is the connection with our other problem is a little remote, perhaps.
Professor Prigogine?
Well, I would not agree with what Professor Landsberg was saying. The main point is that to make the choices, we need a mechanism. The brain is not simply some passive receiver. The question is that the choices and the bifurcation are outgrowths of a very complex mechanism. And that is why I'm so deeply interested in the recent study of neurophysiological systems, which show an enormous complexity even when we don't make any choice, which is in the case of sleep, and a much smaller complexity in epilepsy. In epilepsy, we go to a much more organized type of behavior than in the deep sleep, and even more so if you compare with conscious activity. Therefore, the point is not that we have a kind of vacuum over which comes choices or decisions or waiting times or something like that. It is outgrowth of a complex activity inside the brain, complexity which we begin to be able to formulate in a mathematical fashion. And I think that is, by the way, a very interesting thing, that a work which has been done by many people in the last years is this analysis of temporal rhythms, of musical, I would say, of music in some cases, of time series, and seeing what kind of structure is the structure which gave rise to this time series. And I think our behavior, in a sense, is a time series, is a outgrowth of some deep intrinsic structure.
Do some of you have still some remarks on freedom? Perhaps this is a good point to let the audience have some opinions on this very controversial matter. Yeah. No,
I think I wanted to say two things. One is the question of, as I said before, the question of determinism and indeterminism seems to me to be rather different from the question of freedom. If I am hungry because of completely deterministic reasons, because some physical things have happened or have not happened, which cause with one probability of 1 that I feel hungry, then I am hungry, and my being hungry is not something stochastic or whatever, is something necessary given the previous data. But nevertheless, if I am hungry, I can be free to eat or not free to eat because the door is closed or for many other reasons. So I think in a fully deterministic world, I would be able to be free and to be unfree. So I think the question of human freedom and of political freedom and so on has not so much to do with the question of physical determinism as it seems at the first glance. But perhaps one part of the problem we all as men on the street feel is the following. When we look at space-time from a naive point of view, from a subjective point of view, it seems to be a huge difference between the past and the future. In the past, everything is closed, everything is settled, all is done, and well, as Professor Landsberg would say, things have happened and everything. And the future, on the contrary, seems quite open, full of opportunities, full of possibilities. One has the impression as if there was only one past, but there were lots of futures, so to speak. But on the other side, from a physical and really from any scientific point of view, we don't see any special difference in space-time according to this particular moment of time we are in now. Then I would like to ask any of these eminent people there to enlighten us a little about the relationship between these different subjective feeling of a very big difference between past and future and this sort of scientific awareness of a sort of homogeneity along the time axis.
Perhaps some of you would like to ask to answer to Professor Mosterin's question. Professor Ludwig.
Will try to answer. The first thing is that many things in our body are not are determined, but the nature makes very hard efforts that these that some things are determined, have determined dynamics in the body. If not, that would be very difficult to live, something. But there is the brain, and it's also my meaning that from the physical point of view, this brain is not determined, and therefore it does not follow the free will, or that I can decide from this indeterminism. But there is a possibility that we know that we are free without contradiction. We have a free will. And if you ask the difference between the time where all is fixed and the future, in the future will be also only a definite thing. We don't know it, what will be. But we only don't know it, but we can make it what will be by other free will. But that is a thing what cannot be described by physics or by any physical theory in this sense.
The question you ask is obviously a difficult one, and the answers which you will receive will not be unanimous. My point of view is quite different from the point of view which I respect greatly of Professor Ludwig. In fact, I learned most of my quantum mechanics from Professor Ludwig, so I am especially grateful for this. But for me, I think his answer is too subjectivistic. The main point is that today we can give a microscopic meaning to the direction of time. It is not true that all the theories are symmetrical in respect to past and future, neither on the phenomenological point of view, neither on the microscopic point of view. On the phenomenological point of view, take the expansion of the universe, take the irreversibility involved in the transfer of gravitation to matter, for example, about which I spoke. Therefore, there is a definite asymmetry in our physical experience. Secondly, from even the classical point of view, I have no time, unfortunately, to go into this. In unstable dynamical system, the direction of time is in a sense determined by the geometry of the phase space. For example, when you have this dilating and contracting thing which I mentioned, the Baker transformation, the time is in the direction of the dilatation. It is finally the dilatation which makes that the information is lost and that the system is going to equilibrium in the future. In other words, time, the classical subdivision of space-time, was precisely not answering your question, and the recent work in this field, which I think is only at the beginning, it makes more and more the dissymmetry of time and space clear. And in the direction, I would like to say, that time is taking the form of space. That is one of the things which I tried to say in my lecture. You see, in the formation of biomolecules, the irreversibility is being essentially deposited in space. In the universe, the irreversibility is deposited in the elementary particles. Therefore, your question, which is very, very correct, begins to have some answers in modern physics.
We do not agree that time is directed. We agree that time is directed. But I did mean that his question was more than this. The question was, why can we say that why we as human beings can say that the past is fixed, but the future is not fixed as human beings.
Because we belong to an evolving universe, and we are part of this evolving universe. We are not an exception in this universe.
You just said that the contingence of the future is founded on the determinism of our actions. It's because our actions, we believe, have a definite, determined end result, that we believe that we can act on the future. So it's by a strange phenomenon. It is the determinism of our action which implies for us the contingence of the future.
Well, I would say the question's a very good one, and is one that has been puzzling philosophers, I think, for a long time. I'm not a philosopher, but certainly if you think of Schopenhauer, who, after all, said more or less that we can do what we will, but the question is whether we can will what we will, as it were. And I think these problems are so complicated that it's philosophically, I am not entirely able to agree here that science will help us out in this problem. I think the freedom of the will is really a philosophical problem. And I don't see myself, personally, I don't see that I can make much contribution to it from what I know of science. And as regards the past and future thing, perhaps we might remind ourselves of what was quoted in the talks yesterday by myself and Dr. Wagensberg, that because Einstein, and in fact Professor Prigogine also, I think, mentions this in his book, his last book, that of course Einstein said in his letter shortly after Besser's death, that he thought that past and future were really human illusions, and as that's what he felt as scientist, and he said that in his letter to the widow of Besser's.
But may I add to this, because I was very interested in the opinions of Einstein on time, that when Einstein was presented with the contribution for his 70th birthday, between the contributions, there was an outstanding contribution by Gödel. And this contribution of Gödel was Gödel's universe, in which you could travel back to your past, you see, by having the impression that you continue on in the future, and then you arrive into your past. And Gödel presented this in his paper, saying, great Einstein, now really your ideas have been proved. Time is an illusion. You see, I have a model which satisfies all the criteria of general relativity, in which I can travel into my past, and he was even making calculations how much energy this trip may take. And Einstein, that's very interesting, then said, well, as a physicist, that seems to me not very likely to be true. We cannot make a telegraph into our own past. And he added a sentence, which I've never forgotten. He added that means that irreversible processes have to play a fundamental role in the construction of the physical world. At present, this is not so. And this will be the work of future generations. So in a sense, you see, that is exactly, I think, the type of question which you've been asking. And I hope that the future generations will indeed work out a view of the world in which, on the fundamental level, and it's beginning now to be the case, time appears with its dissymmetry in richer ways than it was appearing in classical physics.
I would like to say something about the problem of time reversibility or irreversibility. I'm impressed by the certitude of Professor Prigogine about the fundamental irreversibility of time, even, I would say, at the local structure. You would say even at the local structure. And it seems to me that you have to realize that the problem of time irreversibility or reversibility in general, in a system in a classical dynamical system defined by un flow, comment dit-on ça?
Flow.
A flow, defined by a flow in a manifold. This problem is not a local question. It depends on the topology of the domain of the space you are considering. And the answer might be quite different according to the domain of the space you consider. So you may consider the problem globally, of course, and the problem, if the manifold is closed, then of course you may consider the problem globally and you may get an answer. But if you start with a standard flow in a manifold, then locally you have a flow box, and in this flow box, of course, you have time reversibility. You have in a flow box, you have always time reversibility. So if you say that time is irreversible locally on an intrinsic way, you are more or less giving up the model of differential systems for determinism.
Exactly.
You believe that space ramifies all the time. No, you don't believe.
No, not at all. What I'm saying, no. What I'm saying is that we have to give up the idea of dynamical systems and go to the idea to semigroups. And semigroups are no more dealing with individual dynamical trajectories, but with collections of trajectories. And this is the behavior of the collection of trajectories which have irreversibility built in. It is in the transition. You cannot make the transition on individual trajectories because there is no way to go from individual trajectories to semigroups. By the way, if individual trajectories would have any meaning, there would be also no reason to go to semigroups. So the whole idea, all this is related. It is because a trajectory is something which loses meaning when the information increases with the length of the trajectory, that you have to go to situations in which you have to deal with bundles of trajectories, and where the type of description which you introduce at initial time is conserved and transformed into later situation. If I would like to answer this question on the most, I would say, basic level, I would like, in a more philosophical way, I would like to say that finally we are dealing here with the problem of being and becoming. And this problem of being to becoming and becoming is not only a logical problem. In the classical deterministic view, being was something intemporal. Future and past being essentially playing the same role. It was something, as a being, as a state, was defined without an arrow of time, if I can say so. And the laws of nature, having a full temporal symmetry, we are propagating simply the symmetry from one point to another. In the view, in the world view, I would like to say, of irreversible processes, the state has already a broken time symmetry, and the laws of nature have also a broken time symmetry, and propagate this broken time symmetry expressed by semigroups from one point to another. Now, from the logical point of view, both concepts are possible. There is nothing from the logical point of view. But once I speak about nature, in a sense, I already introduce a priori this difference between the past and the future, about which Aristotle was already introducing. Therefore, from the factual point of view, I think there is just no way out than to express that nature has a broken time symmetry of which we are the manifestations, in a sense, in a very far distant way, and which are propagated by laws with broken time symmetry. And we are only at the beginning, of course, to understand these laws. That is very natural, because essentially we were for 3 centuries studying very simple periodic systems. But now we have to do it. The examples which I gave, but I can give many others, show very well that you can obtain results in this direction.
Yeah, but this, I'm sorry.
Sorry, just last word, because I have been told that we have some technical problems, so I ask you to be very short.
I just, you cannot speak about a semi-group abstractly. You have to define it in some sense, like in Baker transformations. And in the case of Baker's transformation, I would say that in the geometry of the transformation, you have points which have several counter image. So this is the source of the irreversibility.
The source of the irreversibility is the introduction of a non-locality in space,
Exactly.
in the phase
Yeah.
space. In the non-locality is the expression that we can no more follow each trajectory, but only a bundle of trajectories. Therefore, finally, the space-time of the phase space of the Baker, instead of being a simple geometrical space-time, becomes a dynamical space-time in which the Lyapunov length, the Kolmogorov entropy, and so on, two technical equations to be discussed here, enter in the very geometrical structure of the system. And that is what permits you to go from individual trajectories or from a group description to a semi-group description.
I will now hand over to Professor Wagensberg, who will say some final words about this very interesting discussion.
Just a few moments. Can you hear? I am told that Salvador Dalí has recorded a farewell for us. Thanks to all of you, friends. Thank you for the honor you have done me.